The slap echoed through first class. Sharp, sudden, absolute silence followed. Passengers froze mid-sentence. Drinks trembled on tray tables. A woman dropped her phone. Malcolm Devereaux didn't move. He stood still, his tall frame steady, his glasses slightly askew. The red blooming on his left cheek matched the cold rage now rising behind his eyes. "You don't know what you've done," he said softly. The flight attendant, Veronica Blair, backed up half a step, her face pale, her hand still half raised. She expected him to shout, to curse, maybe even to retaliate. He didn't. Instead, Malcolm reached slowly into the inner pocket of his suit. The movement alone, deliberate, precise, made her chest tighten. He pulled out a black phone, slim, unmarked. He tapped once, then whispered 4 words: "Activate GE lock, level 6. No one in the cabin knew what that meant, but they were about to find out. 30 minutes earlier, Boston Logan buzzed with its usual mix of urgency and idle wandering. Inside Gate B-17, the boarding area for Flight 118 to Zurich, there was a quiet hum of prestige. First-class passengers stood apart, exchanging polite nods over complimentary espresso and last-minute emails. Malcolm Devereaux stood by the window, hands in his pockets, his gaze somewhere above the aircraft parked at the gate. His posture was relaxed but precise. He didn't posture. He didn't need to. Beside him, Evelyn Devereaux helped their granddaughter Jasmine zip up her tiny coat. The 5-year-old giggled, already pointing at clouds outside and naming them. "That one's a bunny. That one's like a dragon with a big head." Evelyn smiled. They all looked different to different people. Jasmine nodded solemnly, as if that was very profound. They boarded early. No fuss, no fanfare. Their names didn't ring any alarms. The scanner beeped green. Their seats, 1A, 1B, 1C. The moment they entered the cabin, however, Veronica noticed them. It wasn't the little girl. It wasn't the woman. It was Malcolm. The way he walked. The way he didn't smile like he needed anyone's permission to be there. The way he handed over the boarding passes calmly, as if expecting nothing but quiet respect. That bothered her more than she could explain. She walked past their row once, then again, then a third time. Finally, she stopped beside Malcolm, forcing a polite tone. "Sir, I need to verify your seating." Malcolm looked up. "You already scanned us. Is there an issue?" Veronica pressed her lips. "It's just a double check. I'll need you to come with me, please." Evelyn turned. "What's the issue with the seats?" "It's just protocol," Veronica said. "We've had people mistakenly seated in the wrong cabin." Malcolm handed her the boarding passes. She studied them longer than necessary. "First class," she muttered, unconvinced. "Yes," Malcolm replied. Veronica didn't move. "I'll still need you to step aside, sir." Malcolm stood. "Evelyn, stay with Jasmine." Evelyn's eyes narrowed, but she nodded. In the galley, Veronica dropped the smile. "We've had passengers sneak into first before," she said, "especially those who look less like our usual clientele." Malcolm tilted his head. "Less like? You don't look like a first-class traveler." "And what exactly does that look like?" he asked. "You know what I mean." He didn't respond. He just looked at her, that calm, that maddening stillness. She slapped him. Hard. It happened fast. Her hand moved before her brain caught up. The sound was unmistakable. Malcolm didn't touch his face. He didn't say a word for a moment. Then came the sentence that would ruin her career. "You don't know what you've done." He pulled out a black phone. No apps. No logo. Just a secure biometric lock. One tap. One command. "Activate GET lock. Level 6. She scoffed. Nervous. Defensive. "What does that even mean?" He didn't answer. He turned and walked back to his seat. Passengers looked up as he returned. A man near 1E whispered to his wife, "Something's happening. He looks different." Malcolm sat down. Evelyn leaned over, her tone low. "Malcolm, What happened? She made her choice. Jasmine looked at him. Grandpa, why is your cheek red? He smiled at her gently. A little turbulence, sweetheart. The plane didn't shake. No, he said softly. But some people do. 5 rows back, a man refreshed his LinkedIn app, then froze. He turned to his partner. Do you know who that is? Who? Malcolm Devereaux, the ESG guy, the one who built the GET system. GET? You mean the ethics compliance system? The one that links investor scores, sustainability rankings, and airport safety audits. Her mouth opened slightly. And she just slapped him? In the galley, Veronica checked the manifest. She searched his name. The screen blinked red. Malcolm Devereaux, GET Protocol co-founder, final authority level 6. A note below read, Do not interfere. Subject may trigger real-time ESG system lockout. Veronica stumbled back against the wall. She had just assaulted the man who could pull billions in funding from their airline with one authenticated breach. And he had already sent the signal. In Zurich, a boardroom phone rang. Then another in Frankfurt. Another in Geneva. 3 senior ESG funds received the same ping. Live ethics breach. Priority 1. GET lock engaged. The system responded automatically. 3 minutes later, the stock of Apex Intercontinental was paused in European markets. 5 minutes after that, a financial network email read, GET lock level 6 confirmed. ESG-linked capital frozen across 7 funds. Total exposure, 3.4 BB. Back in seat 1A, Jasmine leaned into Evelyn's arm, dozing off. Malcolm stared out the window, the red on his cheek fading. The storm he had unleashed was silent, calculated, and already moving. He hadn't yelled. He hadn't argued. He had simply pressed a button, and now the world would shift. The cabin felt different now, not just because of the slap, though its echo still lingered, but because of what had followed. Malcolm Devereaux wasn't a man who made threats. He was a man who moved systems, and the system had just started to shift. In seat 1A, Evelyn leaned over and gently dabbed her husband's cheek with a tissue. The red mark had faded to a faint flush, but the weight in his eyes had deepened. You all right? She asked under her breath. I've been hit harder, he replied, but rarely with less intelligence. Jasmine sat between them, cradling her sketchbook. Her little brows furrowed as she glanced between her grandparents. Grandpa, she whispered, why did that lady yell at you? Malcolm turned slowly toward her, taking a breath. She was 5, but perceptive in the way some children are when the world suddenly gets too loud. She made a mistake, he said gently. Sometimes people think they know what someone is like just by looking at them. Jasmine tilted her head. Because we're brown? Evelyn inhaled sharply. Malcolm didn't blink. Yes, sweetheart, that's part of it. Jasmine blinked a few times. But you were nice. I was. But she wasn't. No, she wasn't. The little girl paused. Will she say sorry? Malcolm looked at Evelyn before answering. She might, but that doesn't change what she did. What matters now is what happens next. Jasmine nodded slowly, then went back to her drawing. This time she started sketching something that looked vaguely like the plane they were on, except with thunderclouds circling it. Across the aisle, a man leaned over discreetly. He was middle-aged, with a tablet on his lap and a wedding band on his hand. Excuse me, sir, he said softly. I hope I'm not intruding, but I saw what happened. Malcolm looked at him but said nothing. The man hesitated, then added, That wasn't right, at all. Evelyn gave a polite nod. Thank you for saying something. I work in aviation finance, the man continued. And when she dragged you out like that, it reminded me of too many things I've seen, but never spoken up about. I just wanted you to know. I saw it. Malcolm nodded. And you'll remember it. The man sat back, clearly moved. He would remember, and so would others. Up front in the galley, Veronica Blair wasn't handling things nearly as well. She stared at the terminal screen where Malcolm's profile still glowed in red. Final authority, GET Lock Level 6. She hadn't even known what GET stood for until 15 minutes ago. Now she couldn't stop sweating. Grace, another flight attendant, approached with a tray of drinks. She looked at Veronica's trembling hands and tilted her head. "You all right?" Veronica forced a laugh. "Yeah, just turbulence." Grace narrowed her eyes. "Funny, the cabin feels perfectly still." Veronica snapped the tablet closed and turned away. "Don't worry about it." Grace watched her go, her expression unreadable. She'd seen enough to know when something was wrong. She just didn't know how wrong. Yet. 36,000 feet below, in the Zurich office of the ESG watchtower, alerts continued to fire across monitors. A technician turned to her supervisor. "GET lock confirmed. Triggered mid-flight. Apex Intercontinental flagged at priority red." The supervisor stood, pale. "Pull funding data. Exposure reports. Start freezing outbound ESG-linked transfers. Now." Meanwhile, North Axis Capital's risk desk was already working. Elliot Tran, Malcolm's chief compliance officer, had received the trigger code just 2 minutes after it was issued. He didn't hesitate. "Begin Level 6 cascade," he said to his team. "Blacklist Apex and SkyOrb from all ethical exposure indices. Notify Zurich, notify Singapore, and run tracebacks. If they're sharing funding pools with other airlines, flag them too." One of the analysts looked up. "Should we call the airline's legal team?" Elliot's response was curt. "They'll be calling us." Back in the air, Evelyn gently closed her eyes, letting the hum of the engine drown out the tension in her chest. But she couldn't rest. Not really. "How long until they realize who he is?" she asked quietly. Malcolm didn't look away from the window. "They already have." He lifted the black phone again, not to send another command, but to check. 2 brief status flashes confirmed what he knew. ESG Watchtower. Lock active FAA Ethics Liaison. Alert received Zurich Exchange. Auto freeze processing. He placed the phone face down on the tray. Evelyn sighed. "You know, you didn't have to do all this." "I didn't do it for me," he said. He turned to Jasmine, still sketching her stormy airplane. "I did it for her." In the galley, Grace had cornered Veronica by the storage cabinet. "What happened back there?" she asked. "Nothing," Veronica muttered, avoiding eye contact. "That wasn't nothing. I saw his face." Veronica turned, exasperated. "He was being difficult. He was standing still. He questioned me. He asked a question." Veronica bristled. "You don't get it." "No," Grace said coldly. "I think I do. And you'd better hope the captain doesn't." Just then, the cabin phone rang. Veronica picked it up, her voice shaking slightly. "Yes?" It was the captain. His voice was tight, controlled. "Miss Blair, I've just received an urgent call from Apex headquarters. They've been contacted directly by North Axis Capital. Do you know a Malcolm Devereaux?" Her breath caught. I wasn't aware of." "Stop. Don't say anything else. Do not speak to the passenger. Do not approach him. Do not escalate. Return to the galley and remain there unless instructed otherwise." The line went dead. Veronica stared at the receiver in her hand. Her mouth went dry. Grace watched her for a moment, then said, "Now you get it." In seat 1C, Jasmine leaned over to her grandfather again. "Grandpa?" "Yes, love." "Did you fix it?" Malcolm smiled at her. "Not yet, but I started something." "Will the plane stop?" "No," he said. "The plane will fly just fine. It's the people in charge who are about to land." Jasmine thought about that. "Good," she whispered. She picked up her pencil and started drawing again. This time the clouds were parting. A little sun peeked through. The silence across the cabin had shifted from confusion to tension. Passengers were watching, wondering. In the front row, a tall man wearing headphones removed them slowly, glanced back toward Malcolm and whispered to his seatmate, "I think we're flying with someone very important." "Yeah," his friend replied. And someone just made a very stupid mistake. Malcolm sat back in his seat, adjusting his glasses with one hand, while the other rested on the armrest. Still as the sky. No anger, no noise, just certainty. Something irreversible had already begun, and somewhere at 36,000 feet, the world below was scrambling to catch up. The moment Malcolm Devereaux tapped his black phone mid-flight, a silent current began rushing through the backbone of the aviation finance world. By the time Flight 118 was halfway across the Atlantic, more than just cabin lights had started to flicker. Systems blinked, emails pinged, legal hotlines flared to life. No alarms sounded in the aircraft, but on the ground, panic had already begun. In New York, inside the high-rise office of Hawthorne Strategic Holdings, one of Apex Intercontinental's top institutional investors, an emergency Zoom meeting was underway. "Someone tell me," barked Robert Kessler, the firm's head of risk, "why in God's name Malcolm Devereaux just triggered a Level 6 GET lock on our flagship airline?" No one answered at first. Then a junior analyst finally spoke up, voice cracking. He was reportedly assaulted by an Apex crew member on board. It's all over the internal ESG terminal. Ethics flag, real-time exposure hit. Zurich already froze 300 milers in linked bonds. Silence. Then Kessler leaned forward. "I want names. I want footage. And I want to know who the hell let a crew member lay hands on a man who writes the rules we depend on." At the same moment, inside the Zurich Stock Exchange's ESG Watchtower unit, a ripple of red alerts cascaded across multiple screens. One read, "Ethics lockdown engaged, triggered in air. Origin, Malcolm Devereaux. Level 6. Final Authority Impact Zone. Apex Intercontinental. Sky Orb Group, ESG Rolling Funds, X7. Sabine, the Swiss team lead, removed her glasses, blinking. "Did he really pull Level 6 mid-flight?" she asked. Her deputy nodded. "Confirmed. Timestamp matches aircraft cruising altitude. Remote trigger from biometric device. No overrides." "Which crew member triggered it?" "Flight attendant, Veronica Blair. Incident initiated with unlawful passenger handling, then escalated to physical assault." Sabine's lips tightened. "She just set fire to a 3.4B exposure web. Tell Geneva we're in full freeze. Pull the plug." "On all Apex-linked ESG pipelines?" "Every last one." Back in the sky, Veronica Blair stood frozen in the galley, her hand clutching the countertop as the captain's voice repeated in her mind. "Do not approach him. Do not speak to him. Return to galley and remain there." Veronica had been a flight attendant for 12 years. She had trained through crises, evacuations, even once helped deliver a baby mid-air. But never, not once, had she been told to stay away from a passenger with zero explanation. Her thoughts spun. Who was this man? She opened her work tablet again. There was a new internal bulletin flashing red at the top. Level 6, GET, trigger confirmed. Apex Flight 118. Restrict all staff access to target passenger. Legal response teams en route. Suspension imminent pending internal investigation. She blinked. Suspension? Legal teams? What the hell had she just done? Meanwhile, Grace, the other flight attendant, had taken over first-class service. Her movements were smooth, calm, and quietly apologetic. She stopped at Malcolm's row, lowered her voice, and asked, "Can I bring anything to your family?" Malcolm looked up. "We're fine, thank you." Grace hesitated, then added, "I just wanted to say, I'm sorry for what happened. I saw it. I didn't stop it, but I saw it." He nodded. "Sometimes, that's enough." Jasmine tugged Evelyn's sleeve. "Grandma, can I draw the nice lady?" Evelyn smiled, patting her hand. "Go ahead, sweetie." Malcolm looked at Grace again. "It's not your fault. But what happens next?" That's everyone's responsibility. Grace's throat tightened. She nodded, then moved on. Down below, in Washington, D.C., a private elevator opened onto the 19th floor of a secure office inside the Department of Transportation. 2 men in suits were waiting. One of them, Elijah Rourke, Senior Ethics Liaison for FAA, walked swiftly toward a secured ethics terminal. As soon as he sat, a new alert popped up. Malcolm Devereaux, ethics lock triggered, in-flight event, automatic FAA notification. All US-based code shares under review, Rourke leaned back. Well, that's it, he said quietly. Apex is screwed. His assistant frowned. That serious? Elena, he said. This isn't a man filing a complaint. This is the man who built the system we grade every airline with. When Malcolm uses level 6, it means he's bypassed public channels. That means something went way past wrong. What happens now? He stared at the screen. Now we wait. And while we wait, Apex bleeds. In the cabin, tension shifted to curiosity. Passengers in rows 2 through 4 had clearly caught on that something strange had occurred. Phones were tucked away, but eyes weren't. People leaned, listened, whispered. A businessman 2 rows back scrolled discreetly on his tablet, then nudged his wife. Honey, Google him. Malcolm Devereaux. I think he's the one who wrote the Global ESG Integrity Framework. She tapped in the name. The screen loaded. Her breath caught. He's the founder of North Axis Capital. He manages like over $100 billion in ethics-based assets. They both looked up at Malcolm, now quietly sipping a glass of water next to his wife and granddaughter. The woman whispered, and she slapped him. At that exact moment, Apex's CEO, Daniel Merrow, landed in Frankfurt for a business forum. He turned on his phone and blinked at the flood of notifications. Urgent. Get lock triggered. Flight 118. Call legal now 1.2b. Freeze in motion. Swiss, Singapore, Germany. He stood still in the terminal. Then hissed, Get me someone from Zurich. Now. Back in first class, Evelyn leaned toward Malcolm. You know, when we boarded, I just wanted to get some rest. Malcolm exhaled slowly. So did I. And now? He looked around the cabin, saw how quiet it had gotten, how passengers were peeking through the edges of their curiosity and discomfort. Now we've reminded the world that power doesn't always wear a name tag. Jasmine looked up. Does that mean we're famous now? Evelyn smiled. No, baby. It means some people finally saw what should have been obvious. Jasmine scribbled faster. In the cockpit, the captain received one final encrypted message through the aircraft's secure channel. It was brief. Passenger Malcolm Devereaux cleared. No interference, all flight data logged. Legal to meet on landing. He glanced back toward the crew door, then flicked the switch to page the lead attendant. Grace answered. Grace, he said, carefully choosing his words. Make sure Mr. Devereaux and his family are comfortable. Do not engage unless asked. FAA is already tracking. Legal teams will be waiting upon arrival. Grace nodded. Understood. He paused. And keep Veronica away from him. Yes, sir. 30,000 feet above the Atlantic, a plane glided through clear skies. But inside, the winds of accountability had already shifted. Veronica Blair was pacing in the galley now, trying not to look at the flight tracker app on her phone. But every red news alert was clearer than the last. ESG giant triggers flight ethics lockdown. $3.4 billion freeze after mid-air discrimination incident. Anonymous source confirms passenger is Malcolm Devereaux. She felt nauseous. This wasn't just a bad shift. It was the end of her career, and it hadn't even landed yet. The descent into JFK had just begun when the atmosphere in the first-class cabin shifted again. This time, not from tension, but from a slow unraveling of awareness. What began as a ripple had turned into a flood. The passengers weren't just curious anymore. They were watching history unfold from seat 3A, and most of them had no idea they'd just become witnesses in a federal investigation. From her jump seat in the galley, Veronica Blair stared at the thin strip of overhead lighting, her mind in a full tailspin. She had read every bulletin, every alert, every legal pre-dispatch notice that came through the crew terminal, and none of them gave her a way out. Do not engage. Level 6 compliance breach. Employee identified as primary subject. She didn't need to Google who Malcolm Devereaux was anymore. The crew group chat had already exploded behind closed access. Girl, you slapped the Malcolm? You know he co-founded the GT protocol? That's why Zurich froze 3.4B? Oh, she's toast! Her hands trembled. She had been with Apex for over a decade. No write-ups, no major complaints. Now, just one moment. One careless, racially charged moment, and everything was collapsing. She opened her phone again. Her employment profile on the Apex Flight Pro system now read, Status, Suspended pending federal review. Security flag. Red, Conduct breach. Ethics level 6. They didn't even wait to land. Meanwhile, Malcolm, seated beside his wife and granddaughter, calmly buckled his belt as the seatbelt sign blinked on. Evelyn glanced at him, her voice low. You're sure about what you triggered? I didn't trigger anything, he said simply. I reported truth to a system designed to respond to misconduct. What happens after that is out of my hands. Evelyn raised an eyebrow. Is it though? He allowed a small smile. Not entirely. Jasmine leaned forward and whispered, Grandpa, do we have to go on the news? Malcolm shook his head. No, baby. We don't chase cameras. We just make sure the next girl doesn't get slapped in seat 1A. At JFK, ground agents were already in position. 3 black SUVs waited at gate 27R, idling quietly. Inside the terminal, 2 agents from the FAA Office of Civil Ethics Compliance reviewed their briefing notes. The senior agent, Monica Chen, tapped her earpiece. Flight 108 on final descent. Passenger confirmed. Flagged personnel on board. Legal inbound from Zurich. FAA will handle transfer. Copy, came the voice over comms. Security escort ready. Terminal 5B side gate. Monica sighed. Let's just hope no one else on that plane makes it worse before touchdown. Up front, Grace moved through the cabin with the grace of someone who had worked 10 flights in a week and still knew how to keep her poise. She stopped by Malcolm's row again, gently placing 2 warm towels on the side table. Mr. Devereaux, ma'am, anything else I can get before landing? Malcolm looked at her, eyes kind. You've been very professional, Grace. That won't be forgotten. She blinked, lips parting. Thank you, sir. Then he added softly, you may want to update your resume. The industry's going to be shifting. Grace nodded, her chest tightening with quiet fear, but also hope. Not every day did a man who moved billions in capital speak to you like that. As the aircraft wheels touched down, Veronica instinctively looked toward the front, but she no longer had clearance to stand there. Instead, she caught a glimpse of men in dark suits moving toward the jet bridge through a restricted access lane. The lead one held a navy blue folder with a gold seal, FAA Civil Aviation Ethics Unit. That was her first and final confirmation. This wasn't going to be handled by a union rep. As the door opened and the passengers disembarked, no announcement was made. No drama, no pointing, no raised voices. Just quiet, silent authority. Malcolm and his family were ushered not through the main terminal, but through the private side corridor where FAA officials were waiting. One officer greeted him with a nod. Mr. Devereaux, this way, please. Geneva is already online. Zurich has frozen the rollouts, pending your interview and review. Malcolm looked back once at the cabin, then forward. Let's proceed. Behind him, a second team stepped into the aircraft. Where's the crew member identified in the report? Asked one officer. The captain pointed subtly toward the galley. Veronica Blair, he said. 12-year employee, currently under suspension. They approached her calmly. Miss Blair, you'll need to come with us. This is not an arrest, but you are being placed under federal review. Please don't speak until advised by legal counsel. Her mouth opened, then closed again. Her badge, ID, and flight credentials were requested. She handed them over, silent. Just before she stepped out of the cabin, she glanced back. The other passengers were gone. All that remained were whispers in the air and a career she'd built from nothing, evaporating in 45,000 feet of arrogance. Back in the Zurich ESG hub, Sabine clicked refresh on the ethics dashboard. Apex Intercontinental. Status: non-compliant. Ethics score: downgraded consequence. Funding freeze. 7 ESG partners. Attendant impact 3.4 billion 72 hours. FAA response live. She leaned back and whispered, "Told you. Shouldn't have touched him." Her deputy nodded. "This going to trial?" "No need," she said. "They've already lost what matters." That evening, had Devereaux Flight 18 trended on X. Footage from passengers, quotes from insiders, leaked emails from Zurich to Apex Legal, all made the rounds in finance Twitter, legal forums, and aviation blogs. But Malcolm said nothing. He didn't give interviews. He didn't post. He just returned to his Harlem brownstone with Evelyn and Jasmine, helped his granddaughter with her science project, and sat down for dinner. The world could burn down from its own misbehavior. He'd done what needed to be done. And now, the cleanup was everyone else's job. In an office across the street, his longtime assistant, Renee, stared at the latest reports. Zurich had frozen 3.4 B. 3 of Apex's board members had resigned. The CEO had issued a tepid apology that was already being torn apart in financial media. And Malcolm? Malcolm hadn't said a word. Renee smiled to herself. They didn't understand it yet, but they would. This wasn't about revenge. It was about structure, reform, legacy. The headlines dropped like thunderclaps. Billionaire ethics architect ejected from flight. ESG fallout begins. GET lock triggers 3.4B freeze. Apex CEO silent. Passenger assault on Malcolm Devereaux. Confirmed. FAA ethics sanction level 6. By 8:45 a.m. Eastern, 8 major financial platforms, 3 global news outlets, and 4 investor forums had confirmed it. The man ejected from Flight 118 was not just a wealthy businessman. He was the man behind the system, freezing them. At the same time, across downtown Manhattan, inside a penthouse that doubled as the nerve center of Hawthorne Strategic, a war room was already active. Dozens of analysts, lawyers, and policy experts gathered around a massive screen. In the center sat Lena Hawthorne, chairwoman and primary ESG enforcer for 7 Fortune 100 funds. She read the latest ticker aloud. Zurich has frozen all Apex-linked ESG accounts for 72 hours. FAA confirms civil aviation breach under the Passenger Ethics Charter. Malcolm Devereaux authenticated Level 6 protocol using GET route ID at 38,000 feet. Lena looked up, eyes steely. "Did the Apex board just wake up?" she asked. Her chief analyst nodded. Too late. They tried contacting Zurich 5 times. All bounced back. Lena folded her hands. They ejected a man who designed the rules. A silence hung in the room. Then she added, "Now they'll learn what enforcement feels like." In Geneva, the International Passenger Ethics Council, IPEC, issued a rare emergency bulletin. Effective immediately, any airline found to be in breach of Level 5 or above shall be removed from all cross-border ethical partnerships for no less than 96 hours, or until reinstated by both Zurich and Geneva compliance authorities. Apex Intercontinental is now suspended from ethos-linked platforms. Passenger name: Malcolm E. Devereaux. Violation: physical and verbal misconduct from crew member, denial of seat, racially motivated ejection, attempted cover-up. At the heart of it all, Malcolm sat quietly in his Harlem brownstone, sipping black tea while watching Jasmine doodle on the back of her cereal box. Evelyn sat across from him, reading through the morning's avalanche of digital alerts. "They're finally using your full name in the press," she murmured. Malcolm didn't look up. About time they remembered who built their frameworks. She smiled. They didn't forget. They ignored. Until now. In the Apex Executive Tower in Midtown, CEO Daniel Rourke paced inside a glass-walled boardroom as outside the building, a small protest had begun to form. Employees, passengers, a few activist investors with signs. Accountability at 40,000 feet. Passengers are not collateral. Suspend the system, not the victims. Daniel looked at the growing crowd, then back at the internal numbers flashing on the conference screen. 3.4B frozen. 72 hours to resolve or lose ESG standing permanently. 4 major airport hubs considering temporary block. FAA demanding apology and ethics compliance review. He slammed his hand on the table. How the hell did none of you know that man was Malcolm Devereaux? His general counsel, pale and sweating, replied weakly, he didn't fly under his own profile. His family used a private credential clearance, non-billable route ID. It was untagged. Daniel spat. Unacceptable. Another board member leaned in. Do you understand the optics of this? We didn't just mistreat a black family. We assaulted the creator of the compliance system we're obligated to follow. A third whispered, he owns a significant stake in Zurich's ESG gateway. We're literally under his thumb right now. Across the Atlantic, in Singapore, the local regulatory body overseeing flight ethics had already pulled Apex's inbound clearance. Until further notice, all Apex flights into Changi International will be reviewed under mandatory ethics gate screening. Passengers were being rebooked. Cargo was redirected. Pilots were grounded. One man's silent decision had upended 8 time zones of commercial operations. By 1:00 p.m., an unmarked video clip started circulating online. Shot from a row behind Malcolm's family, it captured the moment Veronica slapped Malcolm. No audio, just the image. The cold pause after. Malcolm's stillness. Then the unmistakable whisper, "You don't know what you've done." And then him reaching into his suit pocket. That was all. The clip hit 1.8 million views in 5 hours. Comments flooded in. "This is why you treat everyone with dignity." That man didn't yell, didn't strike back. He ended them with a whisper. "We need a G-Eat lock button for real life." Back in Harlem, Malcolm's longtime assistant Renee finally called. "You've got 6 major interviews requests, a CNN special slot offer, and Zurich wants you to address the Global Ethics Summit next week." Malcolm replied, "Decline the interviews. I'll do Zurich." Quietly. She hesitated. "Sir, I understand the power of silence, but you've become a symbol." Malcolm's voice softened. "I didn't build a system to be famous. I built it so no child, no elder, no human with dignity gets thrown off a plane because they look inconvenient." Renee paused. "And when Zurich asks what comes next?" He replied, "We don't punish individuals. We correct systems." By the next morning, the FAA made it official. All U.S. carriers must submit updated compliance pledges by the end of Q2. This includes adherence to the Passenger Ethics Charter, originally co-authored by Malcolm E. Devereaux. The system was shifting, not just at Apex, but everywhere, because for the first time in years, the system had tasted its own medicine and realized it wasn't immune. Evelyn closed her laptop and turned to Malcolm as the late sun filtered through the window. "You've been quiet all day." "I've said everything I needed to," he replied. She studied his face. "You don't seem angry." He shook his head. "Anger is for people who still expect better. I just know what's necessary now." Evelyn touched his hand. "And what's that?" Malcolm looked toward the Skyline. "A public reckoning and a private rebuild." By sunrise, the shift had become impossible to ignore. Apex's ethics score dropped below 62. Zurich confirmed a second-tier freeze across all ESG-aligned projects. 3 airports, LaGuardia, O'Hare, and Miami International, had just revoked Apex's preferential slot access. The industry didn't need a press conference to realize the obvious. Someone was pulling strings from a higher floor, and doing it very, very quietly. Inside Apex headquarters, Veronica Blair sat in a cold, windowless room. No badge, no uniform, no answers. An HR rep entered with a legal compliance officer. No apology, just a white envelope. Per your Level 6 breach suspension, your employment has been terminated, pending permanent disqualification from any FAA-aligned carrier for a minimum of 5 years. Her voice trembled. You can't blacklist me from the entire industry. I've flown for 12 years. I have seniority. The HR rep cut her off. You struck a passenger. You lied about it, and you lied about who he was. You assaulted a federal architect of the GET protocol. Veronica's mind reeled. She didn't slap a VIP. She slapped the man who built the system, and now the system was slapping her back. Meanwhile, Malcolm Devereaux sat on a Zoom call with Zurich and Geneva compliance officers, quietly reviewing the live dashboard of the freeze cascading through Apex's international network. Each metric blinked red. Credit lock activated fuel supplier flagged airport cooperation revoked in 4 countries. Insurance review pending, Zurich asked a simple question. Would you like to lift the freeze? Malcolm didn't answer right away. He tapped his fingers once on the desk, then calmly replied, Not until Apex signs the updated passenger integrity protocol, line by line, clause by clause. And their CEO delivers that signature in person. The Zurich officer nodded. Understood. Enforcement continues. In a Manhattan boardroom, CEO Daniel Rourke was spiraling. He had been through stock slumps before. PR blow-ups, layoffs, even antitrust noise, but never this. His ESG compliance rating, the golden metric keeping investor funds flowing, was bleeding out in real time. He snapped at his general counsel. Why hasn't Zurich returned our call? They won't, she said, shaking. Malcolm holds final override authority. Not just Zurich's board, he's their systems architect. A long silence fell. Then someone whispered, We didn't just kick off a passenger. We kicked off the man who writes the terms of re-entry. Back in Harlem, Evelyn watched her husband finish his call and slide his phone away. She looked at him. You're calm. I'm old, Malcolm said, smiling faintly. This isn't the first time someone thought I was just another black man with a coat. She chuckled, then asked gently, How long are you going to keep the freeze active? He looked out the window, where children played in the street. A familiar corner, a familiar rhythm. Long enough for them to learn, he said, but not long enough to destroy them. Meanwhile, Apex received a bombshell. The Zurich ESG Council issued a binding offer to lift the freeze early, only if Apex agreed to sign the passenger integrity protocol. The document wasn't just an internal memo. It was a 47-page ethics charter personally drafted by Malcolm Devereaux, detailing everything from cabin conduct training to data transparency mandates to passenger dignity protections. Worse for Apex, the signature had to be public, with media, with accountability, with Malcolm present. Daniel Rourke balked. He wants to humiliate me. His chief compliance officer replied, No, he wants you to do what he did, lead, with dignity. Later that night, Malcolm sat at his desk, flipping through an old leather notebook filled with margin scribbles and annotations, ideas from the early days of the GET system. He paused on a page titled, Passenger Dignity Isn't Optional. A quiet knock came at his door. It was Jasmine, in her pajamas, holding a crayon drawing. Grandpa, this is you, she said, holding it up. You stopped the bad people. You look like a superhero. Malcolm's throat tightened, not with pride, with responsibility. He bent down, took the drawing, and whispered, A superhero only works if he builds something better after the fight. By the end of the week, pressure mounted across the industry. Multiple carriers saw their ethics scores questioned. Shareholders demanded ethical audits. 4 lawsuits were filed by passengers citing past apex abuse. The FAA issued an emergency advisory. All carriers must undergo recertification under the revised GET ethics benchmark. Before Q3, the system wasn't just punishing apex. It was being reborn around what Malcolm stood for. And then it happened. Daniel Rourke, red-faced and stiff, appeared in front of a packed press conference flanked by legal counsel and PR executives. He opened a folder, swallowed hard, and read, "On behalf of Apex Intercontinental Airlines, I accept full responsibility for the ethical breaches committed on Flight 118. We deeply regret the actions of our crew and the decisions that followed. Today, I sign, on camera, the Passenger Integrity Protocol as written and authorized by Mr. Malcolm Devereaux." Then Malcolm walked onto the stage, dressed in a simple gray suit, no entourage, no theatrics, just quiet power. He accepted the signed document, nodded once, and walked away. No comment, no gloat, just order restored. Hours later, Zurich lifted the 3.4B freeze. Apex's ethics score began slow recovery, but the damage was permanent. Veronica's name was added to the FAA's public ethics violation database. Apex's stock dipped 14% across 2 weeks, and the FAA confirmed. The Passenger Integrity Protocol, effective immediately, would be mandatory industry-wide for all federally certified flights. That night, Malcolm returned home, tucked Jasmine in, and poured a glass of whiskey. Evelyn came to sit beside him. "Was it enough?" she asked. He took a sip. "No, but it's a start." She smiled. "You ever going to fly Apex again?" He looked at her. "No, but someone's daughter will, and she won't be slapped for daring to exist." The week after the public signing felt like the sky itself had shifted. Flight crews were whispering different now. Gate agents second-guessed their tone. And, more importantly, passengers noticed. "Did you see that?" a woman in LAX whispered to her husband, watching a flight attendant politely help an elderly black man to his seat. "They're different now," he replied, "like they know someone's watching." But it wasn't fear that changed the air. It was consequence, and it had a name: Malcolm Devereaux. Inside the Federal Aviation Ethics Division, Director Priya Nanda reviewed over 67,000 passenger reports submitted through the newly updated GET interface. Of those, nearly 9,000 were flagged for potential violations within the past 2 years, most of which had never been investigated. "This isn't a scandal," she told her team. "This is an archaeological dig into everything we buried." She authorized a nationwide ethics audit. 3 airlines were put under compliance review within 48 hours. The message was clear. The old rules weren't asleep. They were being rewritten. And this time, they had teeth. Meanwhile, Zurich ESG Consortium, still riding the credibility boost from their swift alignment with Malcolm's protocol, launched a public platform, passengerjustice.org, where any traveler could upload footage, file formal ethics complaints, and see real-time airline scores based on treatment of race, age, disability, and income. It went viral within 3 days. Hundreds of videos surfaced, slurs caught on camera, children separated from parents, service animals denied, all with timestamps and airline names. The numbers didn't lie. Some carriers had gotten too comfortable flying above the law. Until now. On the industry side, the Devereaux effect sparked both awe and fear. At the next Global Ethics Aviation Forum in Amsterdam, his name wasn't just mentioned, it was worshipped. "He's the spine we were missing," said one EU minister during a panel. Another whispered to a colleague during a break, "That man grounded a $12 billion airline from his living room. He's not a regulator, God, I don't even know what he is." Back in Harlem, Malcolm tried to stay away from the spotlight, but it had found him anyway. A local journalist asked for a sidewalk interview. He declined. A university named a fellowship after him. He didn't attend the ceremony. Even Jasmine's elementary school art teacher had asked Evelyn, Would Mr. Devereaux be open to speaking at our career day? He smiled when he heard that one. I'm retired, he said. Evelyn shot back, so was Rosa Parks. One evening, Malcolm met quietly with FAA Director Priya Nanda at a secure terminal lounge, away from media. She laid a confidential file in front of him. It listed 8 Apex executives who had attempted to reroute flights and reassign high-profile passengers to avoid future risk, essentially reintroducing discrimination, but under the guise of operational necessity. They're trying to game your system, she said. They want you out. Malcolm looked at the file, then back at her. Let them try, he said calmly. The system doesn't depend on me anymore. She nodded. Still, we've traced back the coordination to an old school network. Let me guess, he said. Legacy Club, private membership, all white men, all scared of what fairness actually looks like. She didn't deny it. What do you want us to do? She asked. Malcolm stared at the window, watching a flight take off into the orange glow of evening. Publish it, he said. No edits. Let the public decide. The next morning, the FAA released a redacted report. Preliminary findings suggest covert internal efforts at multiple major carriers to manipulate passenger data in order to avoid ethics review under the GET protocol. It hit like lightning. 3 major aviation CEOs were forced to resign. Congress scheduled a hearing. The SEC began investigating Apex's executive communications, and all of it began with one quiet decision on a plane. Inside Apex, the pressure hit harder than ever. Stock was down 18%. Zurich froze a second round of ESG capital. Whistleblowers came forward, backed by video and timestamps. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. Malcolm never filed a lawsuit, never gave a press tour, never raised his voice. He just pulled the string, and the whole tapestry unraveled. That Sunday morning, Malcolm walked Jasmine to church, something he hadn't done in years. She clutched his hand as they passed a mural painted by local students. It showed a black man in a pilot's cap standing on a cloud, holding a boarding pass labeled Dignity. She pointed and asked, "Is that you, Grandpa?" He chuckled. "I don't think I've ever looked that tall." As they walked up the church steps, Evelyn caught up behind them and whispered, "You know they're calling you the architect of the air now." He turned to her, smiled, and said softly, "Then I'd better make sure the foundation holds." That night, as the news kept rolling, more resignations, more apologies, more reforms. Malcolm sat on the edge of his bed and finally allowed himself a breath. Not of pride, but of relief. Because for once, the world was listening to the quiet man who never needed to shout. And somewhere, between all the turbulence and the lawsuits and the ethics charters, a little girl would grow up never knowing what it meant to be thrown off a plane for who she was. And that was enough. The dominoes had started falling. And this time, they weren't just hitting Apex. They were rolling through the entire airline industry, hard and loud. Within days of the FAA's redacted report going public, 2 other major U.S. carriers, Skylux and Terrawings, were flagged for intentional data manipulation, similar to Apex. In both cases, whistleblowers came forward. In both cases, recordings proved intentional bias-based passenger reassignments. And in both cases, Zurich immediately froze ESG funding lines totaling nearly $1.9 billion. The industry tried to spin it. We're working to address compliance gaps. This is a learning moment. But for the public, this wasn't about learning. This was about accountability. And people wanted to see heads roll. Meanwhile, in Harlem, Malcolm wasn't reading the headlines. He was drawing, at his kitchen table with a pencil and pad, like he always did. Evelyn stood by the counter watching him sketch little diagrams, circles, arrows, dates. "Is that another ethics blueprint?" she asked, handing him tea. "No," he replied. "It's a schedule." "For what?" He didn't look up. "For building something the next generation can trust." What he was building wasn't just a policy or charter. It was a full platform. SKYMARK. A real-time public dashboard that tracked how every airline, airport, and even flight route ranked based on dignity, transparency, and equity metrics. Malcolm had quietly partnered with 6 retired federal engineers and a diverse panel of passenger rights experts to draft the architecture. SKYMARK would be unaffiliated with any airline, independent from FAA funding, and open source to the public. It would sync directly with booking apps like TripSync, Skyboard, and even Expedia. If a flight had a history of dignity violations, red warning icon. If a gate was notorious for discriminatory practices, it would flash. If a crew had unresolved complaints, it would show up before you clicked confirm ticket. It wasn't revenge. It was transparency. It was power given back to the passengers. When Malcolm pitched it quietly to FAA Director Priya Nanda and Zurich's executive panel, their reaction was immediate. Do it! Zurich even offered a $75 million tech grant, no strings attached. The FAA agreed to make SKYMARK a recognized independent ethics validator, meaning airlines that refused to integrate it would lose priority funding and access to federal terminal privileges. Within 10 days, 4 major booking platforms had already signed contracts. This was real. This was happening. And it was happening because one man had been slapped off a plane and decided that wasn't going to be the end of the story. Apex tried to counter. They quietly funneled money into a think tank to launch a counter-platform called Aero Balance, arguing that SKYMARK would unfairly skew perception. But it backfired. A leaked document exposed that Apex had attempted to influence ratings through back-channel payments. Zurich pulled out instantly. Aero Balance collapsed. And SKYMARK? It launched with 12.7 million page views in its first 48 hours. The media turned Malcolm into a reluctant icon. CNN dubbed him the quiet architect of accountability. The New York Times called SKYMARK the Yelp of the skies, only with teeth. But Malcolm stayed where he was, still in Harlem, still walking Jasmine to school, still eating at the same diner where he used to grade student papers 20 years ago. He didn't care for the spotlight. He cared that passengers were flying without fear. Meanwhile, flight crews were undergoing a radical transformation. Under SKYMARK's influence and the FAA's new passenger integrity protocol, all US-based carriers had to implement quarterly ethics retraining. Cabin crew were issued new AI-monitored conduct scoring devices. Passengers received post-flight surveys with immediate impact on route rankings. Some resisted. Some left. But many stayed and grew. One flight attendant, Jessica Han from Dallas, told a local station, "I was raised in this job to look at passengers like problems, but now I look at them like stories I haven't heard yet." At a closed-door roundtable in D.C., airline execs debated whether to wait this trend out. One quietly asked, "What if we just ignore SKYMARK and let the buzz fade?" But another, a senior VP from Northera Airlines, shook her head. "You don't get it. This isn't buzz. This is the standard now. If we don't adapt, we're next." In Harlem, Evelyn came home from church one day holding a letter. "It's from the White House," she said. Malcolm opened it slowly. It was an invitation to attend a Senate hearing on aviation ethics reform, where SKYMARK would be proposed as a federally supported platform. "Are you going?" Evelyn asked. He didn't answer immediately. Then, "Only if I don't have to wear a tie," she smiled. "Deal." Jasmine watched him pack that night. She held her little tablet, already exploring SKYMARK's bright blue interface. "Grandpa," she said, "your name's on here." He looked over. His profile showed founder, passenger, father, grandfather, believer in better skies. "You think it's working?" she asked. Malcolm smiled. "I think we finally gave the people a window seat," he replied. The day before the hearing, a breaking news alert hit major media. Zurich ESG Council recommends SKYMARK as global baseline for flight ethics compliance. And just like that, Malcolm's quiet blueprint had become the loudest voice in the sky. The day before the Senate hearing, something shifted. Not in the air, but in the shadows behind it. Malcolm had felt it for weeks now. Low whispers, delayed responses from certain agencies, quiet resistance from old power brokers who never liked being told they couldn't fly above consequence. But this time, it wasn't subtle. It was strategic, and it had a name: the Fulton Letter. It dropped on major media outlets just past midnight. An anonymous FAA official leaked a 19-page memo claiming Malcolm's SKYMARK system had overreached its regulatory influence, potentially violating antitrust protocols by pressuring private carriers. Buried in the memo was a carefully worded attack, allowing an unregulated individual to determine public access to air travel, no matter how well-intentioned, creates a dangerous precedent. The language wasn't sloppy. It was surgical, and every journalist worth their salt knew exactly what it was: a hit piece. Malcolm sat in his study with a copy of the memo in hand. Evelyn stood by the door, her face tight. "They're trying to frame you like a rogue." He nodded, but his jaw was still. "And it'll work," she said, "unless you fight back." He folded the paper. "I don't need to fight back." She blinked. "Excuse me?" He leaned back in his chair. "Truth doesn't panic. Let them talk." She started to speak, but stopped. She'd seen this before: the stillness, the patience, and she understood. Malcolm wasn't silent because he was afraid. He was silent because he was setting the board. By morning, 4 senators, all with ties to the airline lobby, called for Malcolm's removal from any federal advisory role. One even demanded a full ethics audit of SKYMARK itself. Apex stock jumped 3% before noon. Zurich went radio silent. And Malcolm? He walked Jasmine to school. Then he took the subway. Alone. What no one knew was this: 3 days earlier, Malcolm had met privately with Zurich's ethics council, sharing his full blueprint for how SKYMARK avoided centralized power, how all decisions were made by verified, rotating passenger panels. He'd already provided open-source documentation, third-party audit access, and an invite for 2 EU regulators to join the oversight committee. They were quiet about it, for now, but they weren't abandoning him. They were preparing their move. That afternoon, Malcolm entered the Senate hearing room alone. No lawyer, no entourage, just a slim folder in one hand. The hearing chamber was packed: reporters, lobbyists, lawyers, and 5 senators, 3 of whom had publicly condemned SKYMARK that very morning. The chairman banged his gavel. "Mr. Devereaux, thank you for joining us today." Malcolm nodded. "I'm told you've requested to make your own opening remarks." "I have." He stood, adjusted the microphone, and looked straight ahead. "I've been accused of overreach, of turning fairness into personal power, of building a system without oversight. But let me remind you, I was not given power. I was thrown off a plane, with my granddaughter, for being black, and I didn't shout, I didn't sue. I built something, not for revenge, but for protection. For people who don't have a button to press or a senator to call. And if that scares this room, then maybe it's not me you're afraid of. Maybe you're afraid of what happens when we remember. The sky belongs to the people, not to the boardroom, not to legacy families, not to those who think equity is a trend." He paused, and in that silence you could feel it. The air shifted. Before any senator could respond, Zurich released their statement online. "Following an exhaustive third-party audit and review of Mr. Devereaux's SKYMARK framework, we find the platform to be not only compliant, but necessary. Effective immediately, Zurich will require all ESG-aligned airlines to adopt SKYMARK or lose funding eligibility." The room exploded. One aide gasped aloud. Another senator reached for his phone mid-hearing, but Malcolm just sat back down, calm. Checkmate. And then came the second blow. FAA Director Priyananda entered the chamber with a sealed envelope. She handed it directly to the chairman and said clearly, "By executive order from the Transportation Secretary, SKYMARK will be federally integrated as the benchmark ethics platform. Malcolm Devereaux is hereby appointed Chief Civilian Ethics Liaison with bipartisan authority. The chairman blinked. Effective when? Priya smiled. 2 minutes ago. Outside, cameras swarmed. Journalists screamed questions. But Malcolm didn't speak. He just nodded once to Evelyn, who stood near the steps, arms crossed, beaming. Jasmine ran up from the crowd and hugged him tight. "You didn't even say anything mean," she whispered. He chuckled. "Didn't need to." Back in Apex's Manhattan boardroom, the CEO watched the hearing on a muted screen, his face pale, his fingers trembling. The CFO turned to him and said dryly, "You slapped the wrong man off a plane." As Malcolm stepped into the SUV waiting outside the Capitol, his phone buzzed. A message from Zurich. 3 more EU governments are joining the SKYMARK adoption. Ethics just went global. He looked out the window as the city blurred past, thinking not of the power or the victory, but of the moment Jasmine first asked, "Why did she hit you, Grandpa?" That question had set everything in motion, and now the world was finally answering it, not with excuses, but with change. The storm had passed, but the sky was still rippling with its echo. 2 days after the hearing, the internet was still ablaze. Clips of Malcolm's quiet, pointed speech had been shared over 40 million times. People weren't just quoting him, they were framing it, turning phrases into shirts, pins, bumper stickers. The sky belongs to the people. Truth doesn't panic. You slapped the wrong man off the plane. In coffee shops, train stations, airports, especially airports, you could hear people murmuring about him like he was something between a civil rights elder and a modern prophet. But Malcolm wasn't on social media. He wasn't watching the trending charts or reading the praise. He was home in Harlem, sitting in his chair, watching the morning sun filter through his kitchen window. Jasmine came in with her backpack already on, still half-zipped. "You're famous, Grandpa." He raised an eyebrow. "They have stickers now," she said, waving her phone. "Your face, with fire behind it." He chuckled. "They got the mustache, right?" "Perfectly." She paused. "Are you going to give more speeches?" He leaned forward, gently tying one of her undone shoelaces. "Nope. But people want to hear from you." He smiled. "That's the thing about doing what's right. Sometimes it speaks loudest when you don't." Later that day, Evelyn and Malcolm went walking down Lenox Avenue. People stopped him, young, old, black, white, immigrant store owners, nurses, cab drivers, all just wanting to say thank you. One woman, around 70, held his hand and said, "You gave us back our seat, not just on the plane, but everywhere." He didn't reply with a grand speech, just a nod, a grip, and a soft, "I remember what that feels like." At Malcolm's old university, where he once taught ethics, the dean called to ask if he'd consider coming back to guest lecture. "I don't want a title," he said on the phone, "but I'll sit with the students." "You want us to call it something?" He paused. "Call it a conversation." Meanwhile, the FAA began a quiet overhaul of their internal bias protocols. Apex Airlines, desperate to salvage public image, announced they would fully cooperate with SKYMARK implementation. But Zurich had already classified them as ethics probationary, a title that caused their stock to drop 18% over a week. 3 other carriers followed voluntarily, not out of guilt, but out of fear of what might happen if they were next. And in Washington, the chairwoman of the Senate Aviation Oversight Committee introduced a bill known as the Skyline Dignity Act, mandating ethics dashboards across all publicly funded terminals. Its preamble cited Malcolm Devereaux by name. He didn't attend the press conference. He didn't need to. His name didn't need a stage anymore. It had become a standard. That Sunday, Malcolm and Evelyn walked to church together, not for the headlines, not for the cameras, just for peace. At the end of the sermon, the pastor paused and said, "There's a man among us today who reminded the world that justice doesn't need volume. It just needs courage." He looked at Malcolm, then back to the crowd, and that sometimes God hides his warriors in plain sight. Malcolm lowered his head, not out of shame, but reverence. The kind that only grows after you've been through fire and didn't raise your voice, because you didn't need to. That night, back at home, Jasmine was on the couch doing homework. She looked up. "Grandpa?" "Yes? Are people going to be better now? On planes? At airports?" He thought for a moment. "Not all at once." She nodded. "But maybe," he continued. "They'll think twice before hurting someone who stays silent." Jasmine smiled, then frowned. "Can I ride first class again?" He laughed. "We'll see, baby, we'll see." And as the city outside went on buzzing and building, a quiet shift lingered in the air. It wasn't the kind of change you could see overnight. It wasn't loud. It didn't brag. But it stayed. Like a name. Like a truth. Like a seat reclaimed that would never again be given up without a fight. The week after the Skyline Dignity Act passed, something shifted. Not in the laws, but in the people. At Gate 24 of LaGuardia Airport, a flight attendant looked up and saw a black grandmother struggling with a bag. She walked over. She didn't yell. Didn't instruct from a distance. She simply lifted the bag, placed it in the overhead bin, and smiled. The passengers clapped, quietly but meaningfully. A few hours later, someone posted about it. "Since the Malcolm Devereaux Act, I've noticed people watching how the crew treats passengers. It's like, we care now." It went viral in under 6 hours. They were calling it the Devereaux effect. Newsrooms ran segments with titles like, "The Billionaire Who Changed the Skies Without Saying a Word." How one slap grounded an industry and raised a standard. Even late-night comedians stopped making jokes about airport chaos. Instead, they started making jokes about airlines scrambling to find their ethics compliance departments. The public was watching, and airlines knew it. In schools, students wrote essays about Malcolm, not just for Black History Month, for civics, for ethics, for tech and innovation. One 12-year-old wrote, "Mr. Devereaux didn't yell or fight. He built something better. That's the kind of power I want." His teacher printed the essay and sent it to Malcolm. He framed it. Didn't say anything about it for days, but Evelyn noticed it wasn't hung in his study. It was in the hallway, where Jasmine passed by every day. Meanwhile, across the world, small airports began volunteering to join the SKYMARK pilot. A group in Kenya, one in rural Alabama, another in Warsaw. Zurich's system showed a 38% improvement in passenger incident resolution time in just 3 weeks. That alone convinced 2 major investment firms to switch their entire ESG aviation portfolios to SKYMARK-compliant airlines. It wasn't a legal demand. It was moral pressure, the kind money couldn't dodge. At Apex headquarters, the boardroom was quiet. The CEO, once smug and untouchable, now sat with a PR consultant half his age, explaining the irreversible optics damage. "It's not just about ethics now," she said. "It's about alignment, social license. If you're not Devereaux aligned, you're radioactive." He muttered something under his breath. The consultant didn't hear, but the room did. He said, "I should have just let him sit." Back in Harlem, Malcolm spent his mornings walking Jasmine to school. Sometimes people approached. Sometimes they just nodded and passed with quiet respect. One man said, "You didn't just change the airline, you made me want to sit up straighter." A teacher outside the school said, "My students pretend to be you when we do mock hearings." Jasmine beamed. Malcolm just tipped his hat. That night, she asked, "Grandpa, do you think the lady who slapped you ever thought this would happen?" He thought for a second. "I think she thought I'd disappear." "But you didn't." He shook his head. "God gave me breath. I used it wisely." Then he leaned down and kissed her forehead. "And now, it's your turn." 3 days later, Jasmine stood on the school auditorium stage to accept an award for her essay titled, "The Quiet Man Who Spoke Louder Than Planes." Parents clapped. Teachers wiped tears. Malcolm stood in the back, arms folded, eyes full. And though his name was being added to college syllabi, think tanks, and even the corner plaque of a new terminal in Atlanta, Malcolm Devereaux stayed the same. No grand speeches, no new titles. Just a man in a coat, holding a granddaughter's hand, walking toward the train, while the world slowly became just a little more dignified. Because of one moment, one insult, one man who didn't break, and refused to stay silent, even if he never raised his voice. The clouds above JFK hung low that morning, but Malcolm didn't mind. He stood quietly at Gate 5, hands in his pockets, coat collar turned up against the chill. Not a soul around him recognized him. Not in that moment, not in that stillness. And that was how he liked it. Anonymous, present, watching. The terminal was different now, cleaner somehow, not just in polish, but in energy. The way flight attendants spoke to passengers, the way passengers carried themselves. No more shouting at tired mothers. No more second-guessing elderly passengers. No more asking black families to verify their seats without cause. Change wasn't everywhere, but it had begun, and it had stuck. A young crew member walked past and paused when she saw him. Her eyes widened, then softened. "Mr. Devereaux?" He gave a gentle nod. She held out her hand. I wanted to say thank you. My cousin was one of the whistleblowers. She got her job back." Malcolm smiled. "She earned it back." She said, "You never raised your voice once." He shrugged. "Didn't need to." She stood there, quiet, as if afraid to leave too soon. Then, with a nervous laugh, she added, "They said the industry would never change. Guess they forgot who was flying." Malcolm chuckled. People forget a lot, until it lands at their gate. Back in Harlem that evening, Evelyn handed Malcolm a small box wrapped in navy blue paper. "What's this?" "Open it." Inside was a brass nameplate, etched with 5 words, "Reserved for Malcolm Devereaux." He frowned, confused. "This for a chair?" She shook her head. "It's already on the wall at JFK. Gate 5, right under the digital boarding screen." He stared at the plate. "No speeches," he murmured. "No cameras," she said. "Just a seat, waiting, always." He swallowed hard. Jasmine picked the words. Of course she did. Later that night, Jasmine sat at the table, sketching something in her notebook. Malcolm glanced over. "What are you working on?" "A plane," she said. "But not for flying." He raised an eyebrow. She turned it toward him. It was a logo mock-up, a circular crest with wings on each side and a small heart in the center. At the bottom, Devereaux Institute for Passenger Dignity. He blinked. "You made this?" She nodded. "I want to design spaces where no one gets treated like we were." He leaned back, something warm rising in his chest. "Sounds like you're getting ready to take off." She grinned. "Only if you're the first passenger." He tapped the table. "Then you better check my ethics score." She laughed so loud it echoed through the apartment. A week later, at the first official SKYMARK summit in DC, Malcolm didn't speak. He was invited. Front row, name on the placard. But he declined to take the mic. Instead, he stood up at the end, walked to the podium, and left a small folded card behind. It simply read, "Dignity is not a policy, it's a promise. MD." They read it aloud. Everyone stood, not because they were told to, because it felt right. Back home that night, Malcolm sat alone on the balcony, watching the city breathe. He didn't need fireworks, or headlines, or medals. He just wanted to know one thing, that when Jasmine grows up, boards a plane, sits in her seat, no one will ask her to move. No one will tell her she doesn't belong. And if they do, they'll answer to the world Malcolm quietly changed. Sometimes, the loudest voice in the room is the one that doesn't need to shout. Malcolm didn't make a scene. He didn't fight with fists. He simply stood, and because he stood, the world moved. Now let us ask you, have you ever witnessed quiet power? A moment when someone didn't scream, but still changed everything? Tell us where you're watching from and what dignity means to you. We'd love to hear your story.